Before I forget, make sure that I start the recording. So we'll give it one more minute and then we can get started. You can see the screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Eleanor Rangers. I'm the president of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Cold War Historical Society. We are a small nonprofit that's been in existence since 2010, and getting ready to head into our 16th year of our organization. And this is one of our History in Our Backyard webinars this evening. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining. And I do want to remind folks as well that November is National Aviation Month, and the greater Philadelphia region actually has a rich aviation history. And we're trying to help to elevate awareness of all the history in this area. So you are going to start seeing a little bit more of that information sprinkling out on our social sites over the next year. I also would kindly remind folks that if you could mute your microphones and turn your cameras off just to preserve bandwidth and minimize any extraneous noise during the presentation, we very much would appreciate it. Certainly, we'll open things up for Q&A at the end, and then that won't be a problem to turn your cameras on and unmute your microphones. As you may have heard when we were chatting a little bit before the beginning of the program, we do maintain a site on YouTube, and we do take these recordings and upload them to our YouTube channel. So, definitely check it out. If you happen to miss a program, more than likely we have recorded it and it will be up on our YouTube channel. I do have some other programming on there as well that may be of interest, may be of interest as well related to Cold War and the space race. We also, for those of you on Facebook, we do have a Facebook page. I do try to keep that updated with our programming and some other miscellaneous posts, but mostly it is a venue just to make sure that you are seeing our presentations that are planned. The other thing I just wanted to mention is been kind of busy lately. We have a number of things that have been going on. The first is we were contacted by one of the local school districts, actually in Bucks County, to review some social studies lesson plans that have been prepared in anticipation of America 250 next year. And this is going to be incorporated into the local schools. So we did have an opportunity to review lesson plans from second grade up to high school related to the Cold War. So we were kind of excited to be able to make that contribution and hopefully increase awareness among the youth in Bucks County. Um, Also next week, I have an interview upcoming along with the owner of the Johnsville Centrifuge, the Fuge, Sam Crivero, for PBS Channel 39 out of the Lehigh Valley. So there will be an interview program that you'll be able to view sometime in the near future. And then finally, there is a local gentleman by the name of Jason Sherman who has been working on a documentary about local history called Before the Moon. And as he's in the process of filming that, I was interviewed for that over the last month. So you will see yours truly in that documentary eventually, and it is due for release sometime I think towards mid-year in 2026. So got a lot of stuff going on, which is great. Also, as a nonprofit organization, I have to put the plug in that donations are always welcome if you choose to donate to a organization. Giving Tuesday is coming up right after Thanksgiving, so that is an opportune time to think about that. So, if you so choose, please keep our organization in mind. And for those who have donated in the past, we certainly are grateful for the donations. This is just a reminder of our 2026 programming coming up, and you'll see that we do have quite a few live programs in Warminster next year, starting in January with Gary Campbell, who is a local artist and historian who's going to be talking about the A-10 Warthog, which, as you know, used to fly out of uh, Willow Grove base. So lots of great programming coming up next year. So really looking forward to it. And in December, we will round out our 2025 lecture series with a presentation by Art Horbach on sonobuoys. So very much looking forward to Art's presentation as well. That will be in Warminster, and I will be making an attempt to do a live stream of that one. So for those that can't make it, we should be also having that presentation on Zoom as well. And then here's, of course, Gary's presentation coming up on January 8th. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker this evening, Carl Jensen. Carl was the founding head of the Department of Intelligence and Security Studies at the Citadel. He served in the Navy for 5 years and then enjoyed a 22-year career with the Federal Bureau of Investigation as a field agent, supervisory agent, and forensic examiner cryptanalyst. Additionally, Jensen was the lead instructor for the FBI National Academy's terrorism course for several years, and he joined the Citadel in 2017. Jensen's authored and co-authored over 70 books, articles, book chapters, and reviews, and earned numerous awards for research and as an educator. And he retired from the Citadel in 2020. So without further ado, I am going to turn things over to Carl to talk about life aboard a nuclear ballistic missile submarine at the height of the Cold War.
Thank you, Eleanor. And I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation.
Yeah.
Okay, there we are. Okay, so first of all, thank you, Eleanor. Thank you to the Society for having me here tonight. Thank you all in the audience who are listening to this, giving up your part of your Thursday night to be part of it. I appreciate it. I want to go ahead and acknowledge that some of my shipmates have decided to attend, and I am, as always, depending upon them to correct me whenever I say something wrong or I misremember something. So please feel free to do that, folks. So the format for tonight, I thought what we would do is I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes or so, and then I'm going to go ahead and open the floor for questions. Hopefully you will have some. But I have to warn you, like Eleanor said, I am a college professor. I was a college professor, which means I have the unique ability to jam about 2 minutes of information into about 2 hours. So y'all are forewarned, but I will attempt to restrain myself tonight. Second, one of the things that really scares us submariners, and I'm sure some of the other Cold Warriors out there, is that we might, when we're doing talks like this, inadvertently kind of wander into the classified world. And it's been about 45 years, so memories aren't what they used to be. But to that end, anytime I discuss anything technical tonight, it's going to be something that I have ensured is available in the public domain. So the numbers and the facts that I cite tonight they're all out there. They're available to anyone who cares to look. And finally, while I'll be talking about technical things, I really do want this, I want to concentrate on what life was actually like aboard a boomer, particularly for a junior officer just getting started. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. A little about me. Most folks earn their submarine nicknames when they've been on the boat for a while. I actually walked aboard with mine, Ensign Jensen. The crew loved it. So a couple of things about serving on a submarine. First, if you're thin-skinned, if you're overly sensitive, if you're easily offended, submarine life is probably not the place for you. Second, it takes a submarine crew about 15 minutes to size you up when you come aboard, and they are almost never wrong. Aboard a sub, the difference between officer and enlisted is, in my experience, less than it is on a surface ship. And for good reason. You're confined in a steel tube for many days, and you have to exist as a family. Although occasionally it may appear to be a slightly dysfunctional one, but I assure you that at the end of the day, it's very functional. Now, that lovely lady that you see standing to my right is my bride of 45 years. It's the lovely Brenda Jensen. She looks the same today as she did back then. I don't. And I put that slide in there on purpose to really underscore the essential, if sometimes underappreciated role that significant others and families play in the submarine world. And I argue that they serve and they serve just as much as we did, and maybe more. Maybe more, because we'd leave them behind with the bills to pay, with families to raise, with emergencies to confront. We'd leave them behind, and they're dealing with the loneliness of separation. They're never quite knowing for sure that we're going to be coming back. So they serve as well. Now, if it were up to me, I would make a separate holiday named Veterans Family Day, and I would give everyone 2 days off. So, a little bit about me. I graduated from the Naval Academy in 1978. I spent a year undergoing submarine and weapons systems training, and I reported to the USS George Washington Carver Gold Crew as an assistant weapons officer in March of 1979. I served for 2 years aboard the Carver and then rotated to become the flag lieutenant at Submarine Group 5, which was a fast attack group in San Diego. In 1983, I separated from the Navy and I began my civilian careers. My first commander in chief was Jimmy Carter, and my second was Ronald Reagan. So it was really a time of a lot of fast moving change and arguably the height of the Cold War. So a little bit of background on the various submarines that we operate. So the Cold War gave rise to two types of submarines. Now there were many similarities between them, but the missions were significantly different. And if you were a career submarine sailor, you could, with some exceptions, expect to serve on both types of boats. Now, the first group were and are the fast attacks, and you can see those are the ones over there on the left. They are the aggressors. They are the offense. In time of war, there are hunters and our killers. They're seeking out enemy fleets and enemy submarines and attempting to destroy them. In times of peace, they perform highly sensitive intelligence gathering operations and they support the fleet. So by the late 70s, we had about 90 of them, and the vast majority of them were nuclear powered, although we did have a few diesel boats left. Now, like most other Navy ships, they operate and operated with a single crew. And when they're not at sea, they're preparing to go back to sea. Their operational and upkeep tempo is frenetic. And as well, their operational schedule in those days and today was and is unpredictable. You might return to port expecting to stay there, but something would happen and you would find yourself underway. Now, fleet ballistic missile subs or boomers, which are called that because they can deliver weapons that make big nuclear sized booms, have an entirely different mission. They support the nuclear triad, which we'll discuss here in a few minutes. But basically, their mission is to clandestinely ferry nuclear strategic missiles around the ocean and be ready to launch them at a moment's notice. Because they work in tandem with other nuclear assets that are the other parts of the triad, their operational schedule is actually determined at a level above the Navy. And because it's so important to keep them at sea for as long as possible, it was decided to equip them with two crews, the blue and the gold. That was, up to that point, unprecedented, as far as I know, in the Navy. And it was done to prevent total burnout of one group of folks. So in a normal year, the average boomer was expected to be at sea about 70% of the time. Now, because of the above and because of the rigid scheduling that goes into programming nuclear assets, our deployments were highly scheduled. Barring something unforeseen, you knew within a few days when you would embark on patrol and when you'd return. So the premise, you all probably know this, but the premise behind boomers is the shared doctrine. And when I say shared, shared among us and other nations out there, of mutually assured destruction. Now, of course, the US developed and launched the first nuclear weapons back in 1945. The Soviet Union exploded its first nuclear bomb in 1949. And from that time forward, you basically had two sides armed with weapons of absolutely unimaginable destructive power. So, to ensure that neither side would launch a first strike against the other, we struck this deal. Um, you don't nuke us, and we won't nuke you. If you do strike, we have enough capability to strike back equally as hard. So the mission of America's boomers became this, and you can read it up there: serve as a stealthy, long endurance launch platform for nuclear armed missiles, providing a survivable and effective nuclear deterrent. Now, I bolded and underlined that last word for a very specific reason. Deterrence is what we were all about. If we ever had to launch our missiles, we basically would have failed in our primary mission. So that was reinforced to us every time we went to sea. What you see on the bottom of the slide is a strategic deterrent patrol pin. You were awarded that pin upon the first completion, your first completion of a deterrent patrol, and you were given stars for every subsequent one that you completed. Now, among other things, it reminded us that every time we returned from patrol with a full complement of missiles, we had succeeded in our primary mission. The other three photos show the other members of America's nuclear triad: the Air Force's land based missiles, the strategic aircraft like the B 52 that's shown there, and us. Now, because we were stealthy, because people didn't know where we are, and we operated in large areas of the ocean, we were a particularly survivable leg of the triad. So boomers can actually trace their roots back to World War II. And if you look on the left, the Nazis had designed but never built the rocket U-boats. And the rocket U-boats could carry, were designed to carry V-1 or V-2 missiles to the east coast of the United States. And from there, the plan was that they would be launched against big cities like New York or DC. Fortunately, the war ended before any of these could be built. However, our Navy thought, that concept um, is pretty cool. And we tried to figure out a way to deploy nuclear missiles on submarine platforms. And in those days, it was primarily on diesel submarines. So this resulted in the Regulus program, which actually conducted strategic patrols from 1959 until they were completely uh, relieved from that duty in 1964. So Regulus consisted of four diesel and one nuclear submarine. They could carry between 2 to 5 Regulus nuclear armed missiles. The picture on the right shows one being launched. Now, to me, the Regulus missile actually looks more like a drone or a cruise missile than it does the strategic missiles we think of today. But Regulus, despite the fact that it did a credible job out there, it did have some drawbacks. So, in the first place, most of them were carried on diesel submarines, and which had to use their diesel engines every couple of days to recharge their batteries. When they did that, they made a lot of noise, and they ended up giving up really the one big advantage that submarines have over everyone else, which is our stealthiness. Next, they could carry a limited number of weapons between 2 and 5, each of which had limited range and each of which had one warhead. So the Navy looked at it and said, it's really kind of an underpowered partner in the triad. And finally, they had to surface to launch their missiles, which potentially gave their position away. So, in other words, the Navy decided that it needed another solution. So that solution came with the design of the 41 George Washington, Lafayette, and Benjamin Franklin classes of SSBNs that became known as the 41 for Freedom. Each of the boats was named after a famous American, to include presidents and generals and Civil War heroes of both sides, and famous humorist Will Rogers. One boat, the Lewis and Clark, was named after two people. So my boat, the George Washington Carver, was, of course, named after the famous agricultural scientist. It was the first and only one of the 41 for Freedom to be named after an African American. And launched in 1965, it was also one of the last of the class to be commissioned. Our commissioning sponsor was Marian Anderson, the very famous American opera singer and civil rights activist. And so that was the 41 for Freedom. Now, what made this class of submarines possible? So it was really two things. So one was the advent of nuclear-powered submarines. And the gentleman you see there on the bottom left, who is known to every submariner out there, is Admiral Hyman Rickover. And Admiral Rickover is considered to be the father of the American nuclear Navy. So on a nuclear-powered sub, you now had boats that could remain underwater and undetected for long periods of time. You didn't have to come up and recharge your batteries every couple of days. We could produce everything that we needed except for food. So we could produce our own water. We could produce our own electricity. We produced our own power for the engines. We produced our own oxygen. We could cleanse the atmosphere of carbon dioxide and other contaminants. And so, really, nuclear subs gave us not just an evolutionary, but in some ways a revolutionary new product that was out there. In World War II, submarines were basically surface ships that could submerge for a few days. We could stay submerged for a long, long period of time. But the second thing that made boomers possible was the Navy figured out how to adapt land-based nuclear missiles into ones that could be launched from sea and from underwater. So basically, with a boomer, you had an underwater small town capable of staying lost in the ocean for days and days and days and carrying 16 vertically launched nuclear missiles. And what could those missiles do? What were they capable of doing? So the first one on the far left, and it was the first one that was deployed aboard the subs back in 1961, was the Polaris A1 missile. Each of the Polaris A1s carried a single warhead that had a range of about 1,200 or so miles, and so on. Now, when I reported aboard the Carver in 79, we had the capability, and notice I say, and I know Jim Combs, my shipmate, will pick up on that, the capability of carrying the Poseidon C3 missile, which is the second one from the right. Each Poseidon C3 could carry multiple warheads, between 10 and 14. And the missile range, instead of being about 1,200 nautical miles, would vary between 2,500 and 3,000, depending upon the warhead configuration that we had. Now, each warhead was accurate on average to about 3/10 of a nautical mile, and each had about twice the power of the weapon we dropped on Nagasaki. So, you can see that the missiles got much, much better very, very quickly. The Trident submarines of today, the ones that relieved the 41 for freedom, carry the missile on the far right. That is the Trident D5. And those missiles are more capable yet. So I mentioned this before, but one of the things that made SSBNs unique was the fact that each had two crews. So when the blue crew was on the boat and doing patrols, the gold crew was off, and vice versa. So we'll go through it and talk through what a typical patrol cycle look like. And if you look over under blue crew there, you can kind of follow along as I'm talking you through it. So this is what our cycle would look like. When it was time for us to report aboard, we would get on buses at our off-crew office in New London, Connecticut. We'd go to the airport in Hartford. We'd fly over to England, get on some buses, and they would take us to our tender in Holyloch, Scotland, where we would meet the other crew as they were just coming off patrol. And the first thing that we did is we conducted a 3 day turnover period. So they would come in, they would tell us everything that was wrong. They would show us things, and it took about 3 days for the oncoming crew to get a pretty good understanding of what was going on. We would take the boat over, and then we would begin a 30-day refit period. Now, refit was a time of really intense activity. We had to fix what was broken. We had to conduct preventative maintenance. We had to swap out missiles and torpedoes. We had to load stores. And toward the end of refit, we would conduct a 4 day or so period of sea trials to make sure that everything, all the repairs were properly completed, and that the boat was seaworthy. We would return to the tender, we'd fix what was still broken, and we would perform our final loadout for patrol. We'd then depart for our 70-day patrol. At the end of that, and assuming we weren't extended because another boat was broken, we'd return to the tender, perform another turnover with the other crew, and then we'd fly home. So once we got home, we had an automatic 30-day period of what we called basket leave, where all you had to do was show up at the off-crew office every 3 days to prove that you were still breathing. Once that ended, we began a 60-day period of shore-based training, schools, administrative tasks, and basically getting ready for the next patrol. At the end of our training period, we'd get on the planes again for Scotland. The other crew was pulling back in, and, it was wash, rinse, repeat. So patrol. So I want to spend some time talking about what patrol actually looked like, because that was sort of the bread and butter of everything. I suspect that's why you all tuned in here tonight to hear what went on there. So I'm going to spend pretty much the rest of the presentation talking about what a patrol was all about. Now, while we were technically home ported in New London, Connecticut, our sub pulled in and out of Site 1 in Holyloch, Scotland. You can see there's a submarine tender. If you look closely, there's a submarine next to it. Behind that is a floating dry dock, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. And we did that because basically we were forward deployed because of the range of our missiles. So in order to reach our patrol area quickly, we had to be forward deployed. We couldn't, depart from Norfolk because it would take so long to get where we needed to go. Now, while our exact area of operations was and is classified, you can probably imagine about where we patrolled. We'd conduct a surface transit out of Holyloch. We'd come around, circle around the UK, and we would get to our point of submergence. Once submerged, we would transit to our assigned patrol area, which was a portion of the ocean assigned to us that was roughly the size of a large American state, and we would proceed to alert status. Now, where we transited within our patrol area was up to us. Interestingly, no one on shore knew exactly where we were, just in which 1,000 square miles or so we were assigned to operate. Now, Eleanor mentioned that I'm a teacher, so I brought with me a visual aid for tonight. My only one that I have. I had mentioned before about refit, and I talked about the dry dock that was there. This is our submarine. This is the Carver in dry dock. Refits normally lasted 30 days, but in one occasion we had a 60-day refit period. This was to install new systems on the boat, to fix things that were broken. And when we did that, we pulled into that floating dry dock. This again was another period of really intense work and things. And the visual aid that I have to show you is this. If I can go ahead and see that, you can see my name on it, right? Put it on here. It's a hard hat. That's because at 3 a.m. every morning, I had to get out and I had to walk around and inspect the submarine. And so they gave me that in case something fell on my head. I don't know what that would have been able to do for me. Maybe I could have had an open casket funeral or something like that. But anyway, that was my visual aid for today. So, mission priorities when we're out there on patrol. Our priorities were actually very clear and they were unambiguous. So, number one, safety of the ship. That came first. And beyond that, we were to remain undetected. If we were going to be, that stealthy part of the triad, nobody can know where we are. We had to maintain communications, and that was so that we could receive a launch message and respond if we needed to. Now, we never broadcast out on radio unless it was some sort of an emergency, because if you did, you're going to give your position away. And finally, we had to maintain the weapon system, keep it in working order at all times. So, what exactly did we do on patrol? So, we did a whole lot of different things. And so a submarine, when it's on patrol, it never takes a day off. You're working 24/7. And so everyone who reported aboard was either a technical specialist or was expected to become one. And I will say this, enlisted sailors, in my opinion, are the smartest and most highly trained technicians in the Navy. Everyone, with a few exceptions, qualified for and stood watches, which ran around the clock. On submarines, as opposed to surface ships, our watches ran in 6-hour intervals. We had a morning watch, an afternoon, an evening, and a mid-watch. So at any given time, about a fifth to a quarter of the crew was on watch. The officer stood officer of the deck, diving officer of the watch, engineering officer of the watch, while the enlisted crew manned highly technical watch stations in the engine room, in the missile compartment, in the sonar shack, in the radio room, the torpedo room, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And how often you actually stood watch depended on the number of qualified watchstanders that you had available for a particular position. So I'll run you through the different scenarios. On the lower left, you have basically the best case scenario you could ever get to, and that was called 4-section watch, which meant that you stood watch once every 24 hours. You were on for 6 hours and you were off for 18. That was unusual. What was more typical was the 3-section that you see in the middle, where you stood watch once every 18 hours, you were 6 on and you were 12 off. Now, if you didn't have enough qualified people or they weren't available, you got over here to this last one on the right, which was port and starboard, and you were standing 6 on and 6 off. And your life was pretty daggone miserable because you're trying to squeeze eating, sleeping, doing all your divisional stuff, qualifying, whatever you have to do in that 6-hour period, and that is not fun. So what did you do on watch? So it depended on the watch stations you were assigned. Basically, you were helping to run a small underwater city that was slowly drilling holes in the ocean. So I'll give you an example, and this is the control room on a sub. And I use that since that's where I stood my watches. So the two young men you see sitting in front of what looks like aircraft controls, they're the helmsman and the planesman. Now, they are basically driving the boat. So our submarine had two sets of planes, what were called the fair water planes that were on the sail, and the stern planes that were on the rear of the boat. And these help maintain depth. So each of these watch standers controlled one set of planes, and one of them also had the additional duty of steering the boat. Come left to course 360, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, interestingly, these watches were usually stood by very junior enlisted personnel, and they were often the first watches that new enlisted submariners stood. So the person hovering over them is the diving officer of the watch, and it is his job to maintain the depth ordered by the officer of the deck. He does this by supervising the plainsman and by issuing orders to the chief of the watch, who is the person sitting to the upper right of the picture. Now, the chief of the watch was usually a very senior enlisted person, and you can see him here sitting in front of the ballast control panel. So this is a very involved job, and it includes helping the diving officer of the watch maintain depth, because that person controls the tanks that control the sub's buoyancy. The chief of the watch is also the person who sounds alarms as ordered by the officer of the deck, and importantly controls the ballast tanks, when that help surface and submerge the boat. So these include the chicken switches, which you can't see here. That's the name we gave it. That are the switches that operate the emergency blow tanks, which are basically designed to get us up to the surface in a big hurry if there is a problem. Finally, the individual over there to your left, who with his back turned, is the officer of the deck. Now, he or she controls the whole shebang and is basically the captain's direct representatives. The officer of the deck carries out the captain's standing orders, basically tells the diving officer of the watch and the helmsman the depth to maintain and the course to steer. He or she oversees and coordinates every other watch on the ship and is responsible for overall safety. So if sonar gains a new contact, they report it to the officer of the deck. If radio receives important message traffic, they report it to the officer of the deck. This was the second underway watch station that I actually qualified on, and it took me about halfway through my second patrol before I was deemed ready to assume it. Now, of note, this control room watch configuration is for a submerged boat. So this boat is under the water. When you're transiting on the surface, it's a little bit different. So when you're not standing watch, what are you doing? Well, you actually had a lot of other things to keep you busy. Everyone was assigned to a particular division within a department on the sub. We had 5 departments. We had engineering that controlled the reactor and the engines and all the electrical stuff. We had the weapons department, of which I was a part. We had navigation operations. We had the supply department, and finally, we had the executive department, which included the corpsman and the yeoman. Our boat did not carry a doctor, but we had an independent duty corpsman. And this person had to be not just a senior corpsman, it had to be a very competent senior corpsman because they basically had to act as a doctor since we didn't have one. And interspersed through all of this, in addition to standing watch, you are training, and you are conducting more training. So on a boomer, you basically had 2 types of training. One was externally driven. So several times during patrol, we'd receive surprise messages to conduct a weapon systems readiness test. Now that would require us to go to battle station's missile to simulate launching all of our missiles. And it would go up to the point of actually pressurizing tubes and pulling the switch to launch them. So everything we did during one of those would be recorded, and at the end of patrol, our captain would deliver to the squadron commander the results of our drills. And they would look at, did we decode our messages properly? How long did it take us to get the missiles ready to launch? What did we do right? What did we do wrong? So that was external. But we also had a seemingly endless stream of internally generated drills. Fire drills, collision drills, flooding drills, missile drills, reactor scram drills, and they always seemed to occur just as I had drifted off to sleep after a long midwatch. So, it was up and at 'em, but here's the thing. And this is one reason why we did that. If you have a fire on a surface ship, you're having a bad day. If you have a fire on a submerged submarine, you are having a worse day. If you have flooding on a surface ship, you're having a very bad day. If you have flooding on a submerged submarine, you are having a potentially catastrophic day. Now, all of this was driven home to me on one particular day because on one day we had all of the above all at the same time. Now, Jim Combs and some of my other shipmates, if they're here, they know exactly the day that I'm talking about. So this is my recollection of what happened. I was the diving officer of the watch, and we were conducting engineering drills. We had shut down the reactor to conduct a drill to restart it, and we were basically dead in the water using our reserve battery power in order to keep the lights on. Now, a submarine basically operates like a very slow airplane when it's submerged. It uses the planes I talked about earlier to go up and to go down. And with no speed, you can't drive yourself where you want to go. So that was the situation we were in. And all of a sudden, we hear the collision alarm. And the word comes over our 1MC, which was our ship's announcing system, flooding in machinery 2. And so I remember thinking to myself, wow, they were really stepping up these drills. So we did what we were supposed to do with flooding and no reactor. And then we heard the general alarm followed by fire in machinery 2. Then the lights went out. And then all of our electrical circuits died. Because in fact, it wasn't a drill. The largest seawater valve in our machinery 2 room had failed, which caused the flooding. Now, machinery 2 is also where all of our electrical switchboards were located. The flooding water got into them and shorted everything out, as well as shooting fireballs across the engineering spaces. We were flooding, we were on fire, we had no speed, and we were underwater. Now, it could have been catastrophic, but it wasn't. And that's for a couple of reasons. Every man on board knew exactly what they were supposed to do, and they did it. And there were 2 reasons for that. One, obviously, the training we did. But the other was this other thing that I'm about here to talk about. On a submarine, there are basically 2 kinds of people. Those who are entitled to wear gold or silver dolphins, and those who aren't. And I don't care if you're the chief of naval operations, if you walk aboard my submarine and you're not wearing dolphins, you are not part of the brotherhood, or these days, part of the sisterhood. Everyone who reports aboard a submarine is expected to earn their dolphins in a reasonable period of time, and if they don't, they're transferred off into another part of the Navy. It's as simple as that. During my time on the Carver, we had enlisted men and officers who couldn't meet the rigorous qualification standards, and they were removed from the submarine. They weren't bad people, but we were harsh taskmasters when it comes to joining our very special club. For good reason. I depend on you, and you depend on me. And if you're wearing dolphins, you've earned my trust. So I was thinking about how I could explain to you just exactly what goes into earning dolphins and why it's so special. And I basically came up with 3 things. It's about mastery, it's about trust, and it's about belonging. First, you have to obtain a mastery of the ship and its systems. A submarine is the most technical contraption the Navy has. And to gain an understanding of its intricate systems requires a lot of time and a lot of effort. You may work as a fire control technician, but you need to understand how the ballast tanks work. You need to learn the controls and for many parts of the ship, for all parts of the ship, and not just the ones under your direct control. So if you're a torpedoman, but you happen to be in the engineering spaces when the ship starts to flood, you know exactly what to do. Second, trust. Your dolphins are a bond to me. They are a guarantee that I will have your back in a situation and you will have mine. I trust that you can rise to any challenge, and I sleep in my bunk at night knowing that you have the watch. And finally, the third part. We are I think, a very select group of brothers and sisters. We have a bond that I consider to be indestructible. We may disagree about politics or current events, but when push comes to shove, we are all brothers and sisters of the fin. So, how does one gain entry to this special club? So, first of all, you work your butt off. You give up sleep, you don't watch movies, and you persevere. If you're enlisted, your goal is to earn your silver fish. This is a qualification card that shows the systems and the operations that the holder needs to know and the requirements that he needs to master. So you'll notice that it's wrinkled and you'll notice there are folds. That's because he's going to carry it in his pocket everywhere he goes. He's forever seeking signatures from qualified seniors who will vouch that he has developed an understanding of a particular system or operation. He will rarely obtain a signature the first time he tries. Instead, he will be assigned a variety of lookups in areas where he has been found to be deficient. And this process will continue until the person signing his card is satisfied that he has mastered the system. Now, once all the necessary signatures are obtained, he or she will go before a board to certify that they are deserving. And this board isn't a piece of cake. So one of the requirements that I recall back from the day was having somebody walk from the engine room to the torpedo room, basically the length of the sub, blindfolded, wearing an emergency breathing mask to prove that they had memorized the location of every emergency air breathing manifold on that journey. And let me tell you, there are a whole bunch of those manifolds. But finally, once he or she has achieved qualification, it really is a very big deal. I have managed to achieve a few things in my life, but none has made me prouder than the day that I was able to pin on my dolphins. So for an officer, the process is different, but the goal is the same. Obtain mastery of the ship, its systems, and the jobs you are required to perform. So you basically have to qualify on a bunch of import and underway duty stations, and you can see that it's a pretty long list. The first underway one that I qualified on was the diving officer of the watch. Second was the officer of the deck submerged. Next was the officer of the deck surface, because there is a difference between operating submerged and operating on the surface. Finally, ship's duty officer. Now, once I had obtained all those qualifications, my captain recommended that I report to another boat. You had to go to another boat, and you had to be observed by a different commanding officer, just to make sure that he would also want you in his wardroom. So for either way, it's a pretty intricate process. But even once you get your dolphins, it doesn't end. You're always trying to qualify for the next watch station. You're always trying to pass tests that you have to do. For the nuclear trained officers, it was the engineer's exam that you take after usually your third or fourth patrol. For the weapons officers, it was the weapons officer's exam, which was equivalent to the engineer exam, only for the weapons, and you would do that after your third or fourth patrol. Finally, when you get senior enough, you want to screen for command, because commanding a submarine is the goal of pretty much every officer that enters the submarine force. So what else happens on patrol? Well, number one, even though things are supposed to be predictable, you've got to be able to anticipate the unexpected. So, for example, if another boat can't cover its target package, you may need to extend your patrol. If you have a medical emergency that the corpsman can't handle, you may need to break radio silence and request a medical evaluation or a medevac, such as the one pictured. In that case, a helicopter is going to meet you in a particular place in the ocean at a particular time. You'll surface, you'll put the sick party into a basket that's lowered by the helicopter. He or she will get hoisted up. You'll run below decks, and the sub will submerge. The whole evolution may last 5 or so minutes. So, how do you incentivize somebody to do this? How can you get people to volunteer to drive around under the water in a steel tube for a good part of their early adulthood? Well, first you feed them the best food in the Navy, and our food I thought really was good. We had fresh vegetables, salad, and milk for about the first 2 weeks of patrol, and then it was frozen or canned, but it was still good. The galley worked around the clock. We had 4 meals a day, since folks coming off or going on watch had to be fed as well. And one thing I appreciated about being on board a sub, unlike on surface ships, the officers and the crew ate the same food. We ate in different places, but the food was the same. And as a special perk, you can see over there on the right, we had a soft ice cream machine that ran 24/7. Um, a quick story about that. So we were not allowed to eat on watch, but we could drink coffee or soda. I would get hungry about halfway through watch, and I love soft ice cream. But I couldn't break the rules, so I would have our messenger bring me a Coke float that was heavy on the ice cream and kind of light on the Coke. Sleep. Again, if you're not qualified, you don't have to worry too much because you aren't getting much. Only the CO and the XO had their own staterooms. If you were enlisted, you slept 3 bunks high in one of the many locations throughout the boat. If you were an officer, you also slept 3 bunks high in a broom closet sized stateroom, complete with folding desks and a folding sink. So once you become qualified and you settle into patrol, what do you do in your free time? Well, if you're not qualified, that's easy. You have no free time. For the crew, however, there was entertainment. We had a movie every night. In our day, it was those big old reels that were loaded onto a projector. Prior to patrol, we'd load 70 or so. So we could have a different flick every night. We'd also play games like backgammon. And every now and again, we could get a taste of home. Now, again, we weren't allowed to send radio messages unless it was emergency because that would give our position away. But we were allowed, as the mission allowed, to receive occasional personal short messages from home. This is an example of one from one of my shipmates, John Wolf. And they were called family grams. Everyone was permitted a certain number, and I want to say it was 6 to 8 that you were given, that you would give to family and friends back home. They would write them, but they could be no more than 40 words. So the family members had to be creative in conveying what was going on. They also couldn't contain bad news. So your wife left and the dog died was not an option. So family members would submit them to the off-crew office where they'd be screened, and on occasion they'd be rejected. They would arrive periodically and unexpectedly, and they were a really big deal. Anything to remind you of home. You made a big deal out of special events. So while I can't tell you exactly where we operated, I can tell you that on at least one occasion it was north of the Arctic Circle. In the Navy, crossing the Arctic Circle is a big deal. You become initiated into the Special Order of the Blue Nose, and that, of course, like everything else in the Navy, calls for an initiation, which, as I recall, involved a lot of grease, a lot of crawling around, and very, very cold water. On the left, you see newly initiated Blue Nose and sonar supervisor Jim Combs with some sort of blue stuff all over him. Jim is with us tonight, and maybe he can tell us just what that concoction was, or maybe we just don't really want to know.
I cannot confirm nor deny.
A typical submarine answer. Thank you. The picture on the right is a program from a ceremony we had every patrol called Halfway Night, and as the name applies, it occurred at the halfway point of patrol and signified that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. We would have skits and musical performances and grown men dressed in ridiculous costumes doing ridiculous things. In our time off, some of us worked out, some of us strummed guitar, some of us did both. We had a single stationary bike in the lower level missile compartment, which I tried to use every day. One day I was pedaling furiously. I was rocking out to a Blondie tape that was so loud that I didn't hear the fire alarm for one of our endless drills. When I eventually did look up, I saw a bunch of guys in emergency air breathing masks pointing a fire hose at me. The XO was in charge of the drill, and all he said was, Jensen, you're officially dead, at least for the drill. So, and actually, some of our guys got quite good in their musical pursuits. Jim's one of them. And some have gone on to play in bands. And the CD that you see on the right is a group of submarine songs written and performed by a couple of Carver sailors who were on the boat before we were. That's Bobby Banjo Reed on the left and Tommy Cox on the right. So, so finally, to wrap it up here, I don't think that I appreciated what I was going through enough in the moment. Those were really some incredible times filled with some really incredible people. Our crew, officer enlisted, consisted of the smartest, the most talented, and the most dedicated people I have ever been blessed to know. And to this day, I remember very vividly specific times and events. And truth be told, I often dream of them at night. So the bond we formed 45 years ago really does continue to this day. That's a bond that I don't think can ever be broken. We continue to communicate with each other daily. Here's a group of us getting together a couple of years ago to christen a commemorative bench that our crew chipped in to buy and install at Patriots Point, which is just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. And I believe in this particular picture, we are toasting it with apple juice or some such thing. And while the bench is ostensibly to honor the ship, the GW Carver, in reality, it's all about honoring the men and their families and the men and the women of today and their families who work to keep the peace and in our case did it during a most trying time. So I'm just going to end with this. In my view, blessed are all of these peacemakers. So those are all my prepared remarks. And I would be happy at this point to entertain any questions or comments or thoughts.
Carl, that was phenomenal. There are a ton of questions in the chat that I can certainly referee. And I'm actually going to start out with a question I have, and then I can scroll through the questions and then queue them up.
Okay.
I believe you said that everyone volunteered to do
Yes,
this.
that's correct.
So did that also mean that they self-selected themselves if they were claustrophobic? I mean, I
Yes.
can't imagine someone getting down there and realizing, oh my God, I've tremendous claustrophobia.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to ask, with your permission, Eleanor, if Jim wants to jump in here, if there are any other of the Carver guys there, they want to give their opinions, I would welcome that as well. I will tell you, yes, there was a strong self-selection process. We were all volunteers. And in the the four patrols that I was on board, I don't recall a single incident where we had somebody that all of a sudden decided they had claustrophobia and couldn't handle the stress and all the rest. We basically had two evacuations on the time that I was aboard. They were both humevacs, and a humevac is same thing as the medevac, but basically somebody's family member is an extremis back home, serious enough that the Navy said, you know what, we'll take this person off the ship if he chooses to do that and fly him back. And so we had that happen twice. but we never had a situation where anybody kind of freaked out about being underwater.
other than my father.
Did
We had a
oh, go
we had a
ahead.
Dependence cruise once, and my father was on board, and in less than 5 minutes, he said, "I have to get off. I can't do this."
Okay, so not like father, like son. Jim's son is also a sonar tech aboard a submarine too. So I guess
Yes.
he continues on in the family tradition, and he is obviously not claustrophobic like his granddad.
Hmm. Let me start going through some of the questions that we have in chat. So here's the first question. Did the Navy run any ops attempting to determine where you were while you were submerged?
Um, So we would do training exercises. I'm not aware of any that were actually done on patrol, but we did have, the Navy operated in those days, continues to operate ASW planes. In those days, it was the P3 and the S3. P3 was land-based, S3 flew off of carriers. They would try to find us. We maintain they never did. They may tell a different story, but I'm not aware that they were trying actively to find us to try to give us a gotcha or anything like that.
Right. Um, there was a question, did the Russians have a P-3 type of aircraft? I think that was an Ilyushin 38. I don't know if that's correct or not. I'm not an aviation expert, but wanted to ask about that.
Yeah, short answer to the question is yes, they did. I don't know what it was, but most of the navies of the world, our allies and our adversaries, have ASW type planes and platforms. You're going to have somebody come in and talk about sonobuoys here, which I think is going to be very interesting. The RP3s, and I'm sure the Russians had a couple of different ways to try to find submarines. They had a big thing coming out the back that would try to be able to detect any sort of magnetic anomaly.
Yep.
And then if they thought they saw something, they would drop those sonobuoys that were in there. And I'll kick this over to Jim. Maybe you're not allowed to answer this or whatever. When you were, because Jim was a sonar guy, and did you ever hear any active pinging when you were on watch?
Oh, yes. And that was a signal that we would run and hide
Okay.
for the most part, especially in the Mediterranean. There's wall-to-wall steel there.
Ah, okay. So, and I never did the med cruise, but I had heard a lot about it. So yeah.
Hmm. There was a question about the photograph that you had about watch, and there were crew that had big white gloves they had donned. And so the question was, why were they wearing these big white gloves?
They looked like steam gloves, like when
Yeah,
it's a steam emergency.
right. So I'm trying
Yeah,
to
I
go.
thought they looked like of
Yeah,
gloves.
there it is.
Oh, there?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. So normally the plainsman and the helmsman would not wear gloves like that. We did have a guy, a radioman, who would wear driving gloves when he was when he was on watch. But I agree with Jim. That may be part of a drill. That's actually not a picture from our boat. So I'm not exactly sure what those are.
Mm, okay.
They do look like steam gloves, though.
Yeah.
So in case there's a steam leak. Steam leak is a really, really bad situation. So even if you have like a pinhole high pressure leak that occurs, and you walk through it and you don't know that it's there, it can take your hand off.
Mm. Next question. What was the typical time frame or a range of time for earning your dolphins?
Very, very good question. So um, we had some really super hot runners that were able to get their silver dolphins in a single patrol. It was not unusual for it to take a couple of patrols, but that was sort of the outer limit. It took me two patrols to earn my gold dolphins.
Okay. Um, the question about typical length of a cruise and were you submerged the whole time?
So, so basically, the nominal amount of time that you're away from the tender, you figure a day and a half or so for a surface transit. Then you're underneath the water. You surface after 68 days, and you have another day and a half transit back. So, you would, on occasion, you tried not to surface if you didn't have to, but you would come to periscope depth for various things that you would do. Training was one thing. When we were talking about the reactor scram drill that went south on us, the next part of that drill, and actually what ended up happening, is you come up to periscope depth to raise your snorkel mast in order to run the diesel engine. And we had an auxiliary diesel engine that would recharge our batteries, and we had an electrical motor that would let us go, not very fast, and it would deplete the battery very quickly. So you had to be at periscope depth for that. You had a couple of other occasions where you would come up to periscope depth to ventilate the ship, to um, capture certain broadcasts and that kind of a thing. And that was really, and we depended on our sonar guys a lot. But when you're on a submarine, there are no windows on submarines. Okay. And the only way that you know that something is out there is if you can hear it. And so guys like Jim were like super, super important to us because they were the ones who would hear stuff that was out there. And so, for example, if you're coming up to periscope depth, um, you want to be able to hear if there's a ship operating up above you, because the last thing in the world you want to do is surface under another ship, which, has happened from time to time. So basically, we didn't have our periscope when we were at PD were our eyes, but basically for 98% of the time we had ears, and that's what we ran on.
Mm, okay.
I would like to just add to that.
Please.
There in the sonar world, a lot of it depends on the salinity and temperature of the ocean.
Yep.
And there is a thing called thermal layers.
Mhm.
And the reason why Carl would probably mention that is that we had an incident, I can't say where or when, but we were down below this thermal layer and we were coming to periscope depth. And as soon as the submarine broke through that thermal layer, there was a ship literally right on top of us. And we called out what's called an emergency deep.
Mhm.
And hopefully Carl performed the emergency deep. And
Well, we're here today. We're here today, so something went right.
something
But
went
I
right.
will say this, Jim. I think I had left the boat by the time that happened, but I did certainly
Okay.
hear the story. So
Mm. How deep could the maximum depth could these boomers go?
Uh-oh.
Or
uh,
is that classified?
it is in excess of what 400 feet.
Mm. Could you actually hear the hull sort of creaking as the pressure would increase? Just curious about that.
Yeah, you you
Yes.
you actually would, and it's something that was actually kind of interesting. We had two sort of maximum depths. One was what's called test depth, which is as deep as you wanted to go, which I can't tell you how deep that was, and the other was crush depth, and you can just sort of imagine what crush depth was. That's a really bad thing. But we would have to test out going, to our maximum safe depth level every sea patrol, sea trials, and every patrol. And what some guys would do is they would string a string across the boat, right? They would do from like one side to the other, from the port side to the starboard side, and they'd have a taut string, and then you would go down to your test depth, and the string would like be
Ugh.
like this. It would go down like that.
Oh man. Wow. Um, I have a question. If you had to maintain silence as much as possible while you're on patrol, I mean, how did you dump waste? Or does that with you the entire 60, 70 days you're on patrol?
I thought we might get that question tonight, so I'm
Uh-oh.
thinking about it. So, all right. So, one of the first things that you learn how to do on a submarine is go to the bathroom. And you say to yourself, "Well, I know how to go to the bathroom. I've been toilet trained since I." No, you don't know how to go to the bathroom on a submarine, because basically what you have is you have a thing that looks like a toilet, But when you go to flush it, you have a big handle on the side and you pull that handle. And what that handle does is it physically moves a ball valve. And so you also turn on a knob that allows seawater to go into it to flush everything down. And so basically, you're dropping your waste into these what are called sanitary tanks. Okay. Now they fill up, right? So from time to time, you have to do what's known as blow sanitary tanks. The way that you do that is you have a another valve at the bottom of the tank. You open that valve and you put high pressure air into the tank because basically, you have to overcome sea pressure for everything to go out. So, you're pushing all that waste out. Okay. So far, so good.
Hmm.
Now, what can happen if you're not careful? When you get permission to do that, and you have to get the commanding officer's permission to do that, you go around and you put little signs on all the toilets that say, do not flush. Because remember, you have that ball valve with that handle.
Yeah.
And so if you happen to inadvertently open that up when you're blowing sanitary tanks, all the stuff doesn't go into the ocean. It comes out to you.
God.
We had that happen on a patrol
Two times.
two times, and I remember one in particular. Our captain slept very very soundly, and you would have to get his permission to go ahead and do it. Whoever was standing the mid watch, which was midnight, which is when most people are sleeping if they're not on watch, they got permission from the captain to do that. Everybody hung their signs, but our captain evidently would go to the bathroom in the dark. And so he, I guess, had forgotten. I actually wasn't the OOD at this time, but he had forgotten. I guess he was kind of groggy, just waking up, that he had given permission to do that. And so he went to the bathroom in the dark, hit the thing, and I was actually down in the wardroom. I was awake when that happened, and I heard this from
Oh,
the next level up, which was where control was, and then I heard screaming. And, when something like that happens, you run to the emergency. But then I heard the captain yelling at the officer of the deck with all sorts of interesting sort of, names for him and that kind of a thing. And I decided that, well, maybe discretion was the better part of the valor. So I just sort of stayed in the wardroom when that happened. So,
oh my God. Unbelievable.
When
Wow.
you're in port, they have a hose that
yes,
connects you to the tender
right.
to evacuate the sanitaries. I was standing topside watch while we were transferring sanitaries, and that hose broke.
Oh, yeah.
It
So
was
you sort of get the same effect.
it was
Yeah.
not fun.
Now, I assume since you were based in Scotland, that you were patrolling the GIUK gap. Is that correct?
I can neither confirm nor deny. I can tell you that we crossed the Arctic Circle one time, so that we are at least one time to get our blue nose. But I can also tell you on the blue nose card that we got, it didn't list our latitude and longitude.
Ah, okay. So is that the Submariner's equivalent of what have I heard? What is it? The polywogs and shellbacks when you're on?
Yes.
Okay, it's kind
Yep.
of the same thing.
It's a scallywag and a blue nose.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'd like to open it up if anyone wants to come on to live mic. If I missed any questions in the chat, feel free to come online and ask your question.
Eleanor, Dan.
Yeah.
I have two, first of all, Carl, a fascinating lecture. Boy, the time really whizzed by. It was great.
Well,
Uh,
thank you.
I have two questions. I'm always fascinated how a submarine doesn't run into things. I
Mhm.
know there's mountains under the ocean, etc. And
Yep.
also, I know back in World War One, and especially in World War Two, the subs were pretty nasty. I
Mhm.
was wondering what the hygiene was like, and was the submarine like a floating locker room?
Okay, so we didn't run into things for a couple of reasons. So number one, you talked about running into underwater mountains and that kind of thing. There actually have been some occurrences where submarines have run into underwater mountains, but the floor of the ocean is actually pretty well charted and pretty well mapped. And so we had navigation charts that our quartermasters would look at, and, if there was an underwater mountain and it showed up on the chart, we would be sure to avoid that because you can't hear an underwater mountain. The other way that we avoided stuff was because of guys like Jim. And again, he was the ears of he and his cohorts were the ears of the boat. And I want to be careful here what I say, but they could hear a lot of stuff. And if there was a big noise being made that was out there, they would hear it and they would let us know, and we would take measures to go ahead and avoid it. The other thing that Jim and his guys did was they monitored the noise that we made because if you want to remain undetected, you don't want to make any noise. And so we had different microphones basically throughout the boat, and if for some reason there was a machine making a loud noise, or the propeller was generating bubbles that could be heard, the sonar folks would let us know that. So they had a lot on their plate. They were listening for the the other ships that were out there, but they were also listening to us as well.
Hmm. So Jim, you were like Jonesy in the Hunt for Red October, right?
That was me.
Okay.
Well, I
Yeah.
also wanted to, somebody in the chat just mentioned something and it made me think about technology. Carl mentioned something about the technology, but the technology on board boomers was very advanced. I was on board in 1978. We had the first digital technology in our
Mhm.
sonar systems.
Yep.
And someone in the chat here, I don't know who it is, mentioned the word SINs. Now, a lot of that is classified, but one thing that's not classified, at least I hope it's not, and if I mention it, is we used to come to periscope depth at night and we would
Mhm.
put an antenna up and we would get we called it a fix, and
Yeah.
it would give us our location. It was using GPS. In
Mhm.
1978, we were using GPS. After the Navy was done basically with GPS and they came out with more advanced forms of location services, GPS was released to the public and now you have it on your phone. That
Yeah.
was the same technology we were using in the 70s.
Yeah.
So technology on a submarine is
Right.
way up here.
So it used to, and I remember the second part of the question that was out there, and Jim's absolutely right about that. Now it was a little bit different than the GPS that you have, and the way that we had to go about capturing it and that kind of a thing. But in terms of how it worked and what it was all about, same exact thing. Um, and somebody mentioned SINS. SINS stands for Shipboard Internal Navigation System. And it's basically this big thing, and I don't want to get too classified, but it measures where the ship is going, the speed and the direction and that kind of thing. And it gives very precise fixes for where you are. And on a submarine, on a boomer, it's absolutely essential to know as close as you possibly can just exactly where you are. And the reason for that is with the Poseidon missile in particular, it did this thing called a ballistic trajectory. So we would shoot it up. It was kind of like throwing a softball. So you take a softball, you want to throw it far out to left field. I can't throw a softball straight like some folks do, so I have to kind of throw it up in the air. And it goes up in the air and it kind of, arcs over and it comes down and the person catches it. That was basically the theory behind the Poseidon missile system. And I think, and as I told you, it was good to about 3 tenths of a nautical mile, which is pretty amazing. And the way it was able to do that is we knew exactly what we needed to hit, and we knew almost, within yards exactly where we were, right? And everything else in between that was math and trigonometry, right? And so, to me, it's really amazing that we were able to have that accuracy because if we had been off, if our location was off even a little bit, you know, 2,500 miles downrange, man, that's a huge difference that you're going to have. So, SINS was essential in maintaining that. And so, yeah, so I appreciate that question. The other question was, did we smell like a gym locker? And most of the time we didn't. There were probably some bunks that did, but we were fortunate on the submarine, on the boomers. We didn't have unlimited water, but we had a lot more water than what the guys in the World War II had. I mean, those were like literally pig boats. We could take showers every couple of days. Now, you were supposed to take what's called a submarine shower,
Sonar shower.
not a Hollywood, yeah, not a sonar shower. And so you would turn the water on. You had a little knob on the shower cap. You would wet yourself down. You would turn it off. You would then soap yourself up. You would turn it back on. Use just enough water to rinse yourself off, and in theory, you would be done. So, and the water, and the reason for that is we could generate our own water. It wasn't unlimited. But in addition to taking showers was kind of down the list. So making pure water for the reactor, that was like number one. Drinking water and cooking water was number two, and then showers are somewhere down after that.
Wow.
I have a question.
Sure. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, this is Jim.
Hey, Jim.
I guess I've figured out how to mention this. The question relates to some fiction that I've read.
Okay.
Larry Bond wrote a Jerry Mitchell series of books, which went into a great deal of detail about his training, what he had to study for, his qualifications, and mentioned the Blue Nose ceremony and all that. Have you guys read that series? And if so, how accurate is it?
I have not. Have you read it, Jim?
No, sir, I have not read that. Sounds interesting, though.
It does.
Well, it is. I mean, if it's accurate, everything you mentioned, was in those books, and that's it.
Yeah, but here's the thing: we were never there.
His qualifications, and it was amazing.
So I do remember reading Hunt for Red October, and I do remember shaking my head a couple of times and saying, wow. And I won't tell you where or when, but I remember shaking my head a few times and saying, oh my.
I was going to ask you about that movie, of course, that how accurate was it? I mean, and I've heard over the years that there were a lot of things that surprised people that, were in the know. Like how did he get these the information that he did?
There was one aspect of that movie, and it was in go back and watch it, the first 2 minutes, the sound of the submarine moving through the water. Submarines make a particular sound. As a sonar technician, I had to learn what those sounds were. I was in the movie theater and I said, oh my God, that sounds real.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody in the back told me to shut up, but but they didn't understand that I knew what it sounded like.
Yes,
which was rather interesting.
And I will say this, my wife, God bless her, she is such a good sport. She'll sit with me through submarine movies and listen to me say, no, that's not the way, or yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. So, yeah, yes.
No. I have kind of maybe this is a naive question, but when you bring a sub into dry dock, how do you bring a sub from the water into that dry dock sort of mounted area? I mean, does that dry dock like lower into the water? I mean, I'm just trying to think of the logistics.
Yeah. Yes. So basically, when you drive it in, there are blocks. I don't know if you can see that picture. There are blocks at the bottom of it. There we go. You can sort of see them. They're wood blocks and structures like that. So there's a big door on the back of it. They flood it down. So it submerges into the water. You drive the submarine into it, and then they pump the water out. And they are really good at what they do. And so you have to adjust things as you're coming up, and as it comes back up, the submarine ends up resting as you see it here
Hmm.
on those blocks. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
I actually got to drive the sub into the floating dry dock, which was pretty cool. Now, of course, when I'm doing that, I'm not doing it by myself. My captain is like right over here looking over my shoulder, making sure I don't do something stupid. But yeah, we actually got to do some pretty cool things for a boomer.
Man, amazing. All
Oh,
right.
I want to understand again. I just wanted to ask about docking the sub. You can't dock the sub like you're docking the boat alongside the dock. They show that like in World War II movies or World War One where they're, pulling alongside of a dock.
So we would normally, when we were pulling into port and we would tie up next to the tender, we normally had a tug or a pusher boat that would help us in there. To,
Am I allowed to share my screen? I have some pictures of the sub
Yeah.
pulling into the.
Yeah, you should be
Okay,
able to share.
do I have to stop sharing in order for
Yeah,
Jim
if
to do
you can
that?
stop and then
Yeah, I'll
yeah,
stop sharing, Jim. Go ahead.
there we go.
There you go.
Are you seeing my screen there?
Yeah,
Yep.
yep.
That is the George Washington Carver pulling into the USS Alamos.
Yep. Los Alamos. Yep.
There are, there's a better picture of it. These are some slides that a friend of ours took of the Carver. Interesting little side note, you can always tell the George Washington Carver, you can see the fair water planes. They're at an angle because there was a hydraulic leak on the ship. And for years,
We were never able to fix it.
we were never able to
Right.
fix it.
Now, if the Russians had figured that out, they would know every time the Carver was coming in or going out of port. But yeah, so to answer your question, now you actually can dock a boomer, and we've done it next to a tender because you have a little motor that extends out like a little outboard thing, and it can push the boat sideways. So you actually do have the capability of docking without a tug or without a pusher boat. Although we always would prefer, if we could do it, to do that, because when you look at Holy Lock, where we pulled in and out of, that's not real super wide. And so we would usually have to drive down one side of the tender, turn left or right, and then come up the other side, depending on, which side of the tender they wanted us to dock on. So,
Hmm. All right. Any other questions? Otherwise I think we can wrap things up. All right, I'm going to take silence as a no.
Great job.
Well, thank
But
you
yeah,
very much. It was
this
an
was
awesome
fabulous. I
presentation.
oh,
really appreciate this so much, and um, I think the group here really enjoyed this by all the questions.
well,
Um,
thank you, and thank you, Jim, for jumping in and adding so much to that. So, and thank you for having us. We really
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it. Submariners love to talk to the extent that we're allowed to, recount our experiences and share things and do what we can. So, thank you for giving us this opportunity.
oh, thank you. I haven't had too many opportunities to have talks from that group, so I'm very much appreciative. A lot of our presentations have more to do with air, with NavAir
Sure, sure.
than the Marine Submariner work.
I'm
If
just
you,
so anti-sono buoy.
and I think we may have talked about this too, Eleanor. The stuff that the fast attacks were doing during that period of time were nothing short of amazing. And so, if you could ever have somebody that could come and chat about that, they were doing some incredible things that are just now, some of them are being declassified. So like Operation Ivy Bells,
Oh yeah.
basically we had a sub that went in and was able to, with divers, tap the cables, the undersea cables of the Russian military. It was just unbelievable.
My
Yeah,
son is
that is a
doing
wild story.
drones right now.
Yeah. Jim's son is yeah.
If you want to talk to somebody, every time I ask him what he's doing, he says, "I'm sorry, Dad, I can't tell you." But
Good.
but
You're paying him well.
if you want to speak with him, I mean, I could make that happen. But he's out in Washington State, and he just made chief, and he is in charge of the division that's operating drones all around the country, actually all around the world.
Wow. Fabulous.
And making chief in the Navy is a big deal.
It's a big deal.
A really big deal. So congratulations to him.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wow.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you very much. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
Yeah, thanks again. And for those that's still remaining online, please join us if you are live. Come to Warminster in December for the Sonobuoy talk, or we will be doing doing it by webinar as well. So thanks again. This was fabulous, and have a good rest of your evening.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jim, catch you later, brother.
Love you, man.
I love you too.
All right.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Eleanor.
All
Thank you.
right. Good night, everyone.